We've all been educated to believe that logic is the most important part of thinking. Now, if you start with fixed positions, logic is indeed sufficient. And for the church in the Middle Ages, they started with certain dogma, articles of faith, and logic was sufficient. That's why we started to believe that logic was sufficient. But it's not. In normal life, we don't start with fixed positions, we start with perceptions, how we see the world. And research by David Perkins at Harvard showed that 90% of the errors in thinking were errors of perception, not of logic. I'll give you a little example of perception. In Australia, a little boy called Johnny, a 5-year-old, he was offered the choice of 2 coins, a $1 coin, and in Australia, a $2 coin is much smaller. And his friends said to him, you can take whichever coin you wish. Being young, Johnny reckons the bigger coin is better, takes the bigger one. His friends laugh and giggle and say, isn't Johnny stupid? So whenever they want to make a fool of him, they offer him the coins. He always takes the bigger one, never learns. One day there's an adult, sees this, calls Johnny over, says, Johnny, believe me when I tell you the smaller one, even though it is smaller, is worth twice as much as the bigger one. Johnny nods, he said, yes, of course, he says, I know that, but how many times would they have offered it to me if I had taken the $2 the first time? In other words, Johnny's perception was not just the coins, but his friends as well. Perception, very key part of thinking. Now, it's even worse than that, because there's a mathematical theorem, Gödel's theorem, which says that from within any situation, you can never logically prove the starting points. The starting points will always remain arbitrary matters of perception, no matter how excellent your logic. So what do we do about perception? We've done virtually nothing. So in the POP course, we're looking at perception. Now, with regard to space, we have some broad directions, north, south, east, and west. So you can tell yourself, or you can tell those around you, let's look northeast, or let's look south. Some directions in which to look. So what we do is we create certain directions in which to put our attention. So we can say, let's look this way, let's look that way. And to do that, we create some acronyms. For instance, we have an acronym called OPV, which stands for Other People's Views, which means in a situation where other people are involved, we make an effort to see the view, the thinking of other people. So that enlarges our perception, and as a result, our action is more appropriate. Now, these are acronyms because acronyms have a place in the mind. Attitudes do not have a place in the mind. Attitudes may be there after a lot of training. Acronyms can be learnt and used instantly. For instance, there's another acronym, which is the C&S. C&S stands for consequence and sequel. It means if something happens or we make a choice or decision, there are immediate consequences, short-term consequence, medium-term consequence, long-term consequence. So we direct our attention to the consequences of our action, the results of our choice, the results of our decision. So a number of these specific directions which operate like north, south, east, and west. Another one might be the PMI. PMI means we direct our attention to what are the plus points. We direct our attention to the minus points, the negative points. We direct our attention to the interesting points. So quite consciously, we direct our attention in one direction after another. Then we get the whole picture and we make up our minds. Once I was in a country and a teacher was teaching my work to youngsters, had to choose between 4 people who wanted to marry her, and she told me she used the PMI to choose her husband. Very sensible. So perception, power of perception. Perception, very key part of thinking, very important part of thinking, very neglected part of thinking. And as I said, depending on your perception, there will be the result. Even if your logic is perfect, if your perception is inadequate or wrong, or only one way of looking at the situation, the answer will also be wrong, no matter how excellent your logic. So in this course, we're focusing directly on perception, how we can improve our perception. Simple tools which we can use deliberately to improve our perception. We can use them personally ourselves. We can say, I'm going to do a CNS here. We can ask other people in a meeting, a group or a team, let's do a CNS in this. And they will direct their attention as requested, as required. So it makes perception tangible. We can do something about it quite formally, quite deliberately. So these are perceptual tools.